Welcome back. This is episode 7 of the Josh Leisman Experience. I am Joshua Jat Leisman, and this episode we're going to be previewing week 2 with Kien Lam. I'm actually really excited about this one because Kien has never appeared on one of our podcasts, even though he's basically our most prolific LOL esports writer. So if you're familiar with the 10 Thoughts series or some of the longer features that have been done in the past, whether it was on High or on Someday, Kien's been the guy who's writing them. So he has a lot of thoughts that sometimes he doesn't fit into his article, and we're going to get those here in the preview of week 2. So hope you enjoy it. Welcome back, everybody. I am again Jat, joined by Kien Lam, the writer of 10 Thoughts. How long have you been doing 10 Thoughts for on LOL Esports?
Geez, this is my, I think, 4th year going on it. I was counting the other day. I'm getting close to 1,000 thoughts. I think I'll hit it sometime this spring split even.
Oh, so 110 Thoughts articles.
Yeah.
And you can call that one like 1,001 Thoughts or something.
1,000 something. There's been a few 6 thoughts, 4 thoughts, but I think we're approaching the actual 1,000th.
Have you been tracking in some doc somewhere, or do you have to do it manually through like Google?
It's going to have to be manual. I think I'll probably find a day here or there. Yeah, but we're going to hit it, make the 1,000th thought special.
Yeah, most of them are 10 Thoughts though, because I've noticed a bit of a pattern where you're usually just kind of giving like one thought, like paragraph on each team.
Yeah, that's generally how it's been.
Yeah. So 1 week into LCS, we wanted to do a podcast to kind of go over your 10 Thoughts article, but also see what types of discussion it started. And as the writer of 10 Thoughts, getting your thoughts on your thoughts would be a little bit interesting. So your first thought was obviously on Cloud9, how, they sold Sven Skaren, but also a bunch of other people, and they're still fine. What were you thinking about with this? What were your thoughts on Cloud9?
Yeah, so I was talking about this a bit last week as well, and this is something I was thinking about over the offseason was Cloud9 lost their MVP, jungler. They lost Sneaky, who was the face of the franchise for 6-7 years, and then they lost Zeyzal, who was widely regarded as one of the upcoming best supports in NA. He was a big shot caller for them.
Yep.
And so my point was, if you lose those 3 guys, there's no way you can convince me that you have upgraded your roster unless you are importing extremely good players, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, so there's a lot of people are high on this Cloud9 train. I'm not really sure. I thought at best it was a side grade. But then when you look at it, even for a side grade, this was the second best team in NA last year. Mm-hmm. And so I think I probably underestimated how strong they still would be.
Right.
But I'm still pretty surprised that they came out looking like what, in my opinion, is, after 1 week, the best team in the league. They came out swinging. Their macro was extremely impressive. It was across the board. Their laning was strong. And I think one of the big changes is with Sven in the bot lane now.
Yeah. Cloud9
can put some more resources and play around bot side early. Mm-hmm. I think with Sneaky, they probably could have done that as well, but they just chose not to for whatever reason. And I think with Sven switching, maybe that opens up a few options now. So I thought it was interesting to see how strong they still were after selling 3/5 of their team.
Yeah, I randomly saw Jack in the hallway after one of the games, and he kind of cracked some joke about losing the offseason again. And I was like, how does that keep happening? It's really weird that, like, losing it 4 years in a row, it's amazing you're still in the league. But it does seem to happen a fair bit with Cloud9 where, like, they're very willing to make unpopular changes for whatever reason, right? And this one looks like it is to improve the team. The player I was most impressed with was Sven, and this is based on a couple of things. It's what he said on Summoning Insight, like how blunt he was coming in, the fact he was 1200 LP in Korean Challenger, but then also just he looked really solid and really willing to do stuff. Part of that is going to be the 2 Aphelios games he played, but he was engaging a lot of their fights. He was strong in the laning phase. Him and Vulcan seemed to work really well together, and that took a little bit of pressure off from Blabber, who in past iterations of Cloud9, it's like there was those memes about, no brain Blabber and how he just goes in and that's, let's coin flip. But if Sven and Vulcan are more reliable engagers, then they're able to come at teams from multiple different angles, and we're able to see that. One fun fact I saw is Licorice actually had the best CS at 15 of all top laners, and he was completely unnoticed throughout the weekend, for the most part. So they got a lot of strength. I'm actually, coming into predictions, I'm going with Cloud9 until further notice. Just trying to play the odds. I think this next week they have Immortals and 100 Thieves coming up on Saturday and Sunday. I would have them going 2-0. Do you have any other thoughts on what they're thinking about going forward?
The only thing that other thing I'd like to bring up is I saw Blabber talk about how Sven brought in a more serious attitude to the team, especially because of how serious he was.
Yeah.
And so that made me a little sad as like an OG C9 like fan from way back in the day. Is like they were always kind of this group of friends who were like really memey, even through Sneaky, even through last year. That was still kind of their brand identity. It was kind of a team of jokesters. You saw
it's true, yeah.
When they had like mass benchings, they were still joking about it, and so the team
passive aggressively
joking about it. So the team atmosphere and brand, I think, has shifted quite a bit. And so I'll be kind of curious to see how teams like rally behind that. And I think if short of having a good, funny brand, the best thing you can do for branding for NA teams is just win. People like winners. Yeah. And like I joke a lot about how a lot of teams maybe struggle with their branding. But the easiest thing to do is to win. If you can win, that's an easy brand. Like there are plenty of teams who have just ridden that, and that's been their sole brand for years.
Yeah, well, the easiest brand strategy is winning. The hardest thing to do is win.
Yeah. So
like, in that way, and that reminds me of the Svenskar and Zazel interview we saw right before the season, where they were even saying that the jokiness brand of C9 that was basically Sneaky, and how he impacted the rest of the team, but. If a serious Cloud9 goes 16-2, I feel like their fans are going to be okay with that.
I think they'll be very happy with that. But if they go 16-2 and they flame out in the playoffs again, like has much changed? Because like last year, again, they were still second, third, first even in the regular season.
They finished second place in both regular season splits.
And they just couldn't win the thing. It's been 5-6 years now. So that's the big question for Cloud9 is can they win the LCS?
Yeah, that's going to be something to track throughout, especially if they can get a large lead on the rest of the league, which is kind of what it feels like, because the second team you have in here is Dignitas, and you're never officially calling this a power ranking. So I'm not saying it's a power ranking, but Dig, I said on the dive, and I think when I was talking with Prawley, that they're top 2, top 3 after 1 week, which feels like this crazy overreaction that I'm probably going to pull back on, but your title for Dignitas was Hooney's new don't die strategy.
Yeah, I was looking at the stats again, and it kind of surprised me that he didn't die, even though I watched both games live and I saw it happen, and I think that was one of Avli's questions immediately after was like, what talking about, and actually I think it was the Tigris who asked about his no-death games. It was kind of a surprising fact to see, because in the past he's always been somebody who overextends. Sometimes, for me, it was always been like he was trying to make a play, so sometimes it feels maybe unfair to say it's overextending.
And he's had past years where it's not even like he doesn't have deathless games. He doesn't have games where he doesn't have isolated deaths.
Yes.
Like he's just dying on his own multiple times a game a lot of the time.
Yeah, so it was super impressive to see that. I think I agree with you that after 1 week, they're extremely strong. Again, it always kind of looks like a power ranking because it's ranked like in standings, and the standings are always a pretty good indicator.
Finding power rankings that differ from standings is a really difficult thing to do in esports.
Yeah, people get kind of edgy with it. Like I think on this one, it's only 1 week in, but I think most people would agree Team Liquid's probably still 1 or 2 on a lot of power rankings.
If you're thinking about by end of year.
Yes.
For sure.
Immediately, of course not with Schernfire or Pole or whoever they decide to jungle with. But Dignitas, I agree, looks really strong after week 1. Their solo laners are going to give a lot of teams a lot of problems between Froggen and Hooney. And I'm pretty excited to see how that works out. I also mentioned a little bit that it's not the first time we've seen Hooney do well in the regular season. Like immediately thinking back to 2018 spring with Fox, when Hooney and Phoenix and that Fox team also jumped out of the gate. It was kind of a ragtag team that people weren't really sure what to expect out of. And it kind of reminds me a lot of this team. They jumped out of the gate, they crushed it, and then they kind of struggled to adapt to metas. And I think that's always been a thing that has particularly affected Froggen is he always falls back on these champion picks. When the meta starts, let's say it shifts out, and then he falls back on Vel'Koz, he's playing Anivia when nobody else is playing it. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens if we get a significant shift in the meta, if this is a team that is capable of adapting. Yeah,
Aframu has said that Froggen can play all the meta picks, but also has all these pocket picks. If that continues to be true, then it's just good.
Yes.
But I do agree that Froggen is someone who gets deep mastery over champions, oftentimes by grinding. So when the game does switch, he doesn't strike me as the type of player who's first on the hype train for a new pick. Like, it'll take him a little bit, but Hooney is kind of the opposite. He should be able to pick a lot of new stuff very quickly and have a lot of success. I like that you brought up the old 2018 Echo Fox team. I say old, it's been like only 2 years ago.
It's been 2 years. That's a long time.
Yeah, for 8 weeks of that spring split, Hooney was my MVP.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it was such a performance. Yeah. And then they just barely missed out on a playoff bye at the start. Or, wait, did they even have? They might have had the playoff bye. I just remember they lost to TL 3-1.
They lost TL 3-1
in the semifinals.
I'm pretty sure they had the bye.
They lost to TL 3-1 in the semifinals, and then totally demolished the third place match.
It was against Clutch.
Yeah, they finished third, but they were kind of the second best team.
Yeah,
it felt like they would have been able to beat 100 Thieves that split as well. Anyway, like that team was good, and if this ends up being an upgrade, and Hooney and Afromu somehow find that 2018 form again, like you also mentioned how Afromu has a history of making his 80 carries look good, and the pairing seems like a mini success. I agree. What I'm super looking forward to is the match against Doublelift.
Yes.
Because that's coming up right away. This will probably be my most regretted prediction. I think they'll beat TL.
Yes.
I think they'll beat TL, and I think they'll beat FlyQuest, and I think we'll have 2 4-0 teams at the end of next week. I never get all of my predictions right, so like me saying I think this is just setting myself up for failure. But yeah, I have both Dig and C9 going 2-0, but the TL game is going to be just ridiculously entertaining to see such an early test for Johnson, and it's not just about the early laning phase, like we saw TSM camp bottom lane and crush Doublelift early. It's about what happens after that. Like, can Dignitas find a way to keep their mid-game resources at the pace of TL? Because if they can do that, then I think they're really good.
So I'm curious about Johnson from your opinion, because I was talking to him before the season started a little bit, and I was actually there when they come in for Asset Day, where they come and they take all these sorts of photos, they'll do interviews, and Johnson was sitting on the couch. So I started talking to him. I was like, "Oh, this must be Johnson because he's the only one I have no idea what he looks like." You could have Googled, and nobody knows. Then I saw Demonte walk over to him and just also introduced him in that particular moment.
They're on the same team.
Yeah, so I was like, "Wow, that's kind of surprising." Like, they're introducing each other at this Asset Day, and so I talked to Johnson, and he said, well, he actually just flew in the day before, and this was only a couple weeks ago, so he's only been in LA for a couple weeks at this point. I pulled him in for a quick interview after that just to kind of gauge, who is this guy, what's he like, and he was like, well, this is actually my first interview. He'd never talked to anybody before that.
Wow.
And so I'm just talking to him a little bit. I think we talked a little bit about Doublelift. He's talking about how strong Doublelift is in like team environments, but he's still confident in himself. I think he was saying he has multiple accounts in the top 10.
Yeah.
This is a really strong solo queue player, and I think I've listened to a lot of you guys talk in the past. You've talked about how AD carry is often the easiest role to translate from solo queue
to pro.
Yeah. I mean, you just right click at the end of the day. That's,
in a sense,
and somebody else can tell you. Just tell the carry where to be, and they just have to deal damage. They right click. That's the very diminutive way of putting it.
Sure.
And it was just interesting. I'm just kind of curious to see at this point how strong this kid can look.
Yeah.
Because we talked about it as well in terms of, if you look at the AD carries in NA the past 3-4 years, it's been Sneaky, Cody, and Doublelift who've represented NA on a world stage. So AD, people joke about how AD doesn't matter, but Doublelift has won so many splits in a row that it has to matter on some level. So how strong is this Johnson kid?
Yeah, I know you did your survey and AD carry wasn't one of the most impactful in pro play on the survey, but that doesn't mean playing around your AD carry isn't the most impactful strategy in pro play, because we've seen Uzi and Doublelift, these AD carries, make careers and find tons of success from playing around bottom lane. And I think that Johnson isn't just like a good solo queue player. I've heard people say he's the best solo queue player in NA.
Wow.
Because it was 4 accounts in the top 20, and all of them had like 65% plus win rates with several hundred games.
Dang.
Which, like, as an AD carry, a role that often you don't think has too large of an impact in solo queue, that just must mean his team fighting is so extraordinary, right? That he's just always finding these ways to outplay. And if the nerves is the thing that then raises the big question mark to me. And the mid game, like wave management, solo queue is one thing to know kind of instinctually where to go. On a pro scene where there's spots where you were out of position, but you don't know you're out of position, but like with experience, you would know you're out of position. Those are the things that'll be tested. And just nerves against Doublelift. Like, that dude has completely stomped all AD carry competition in NA. It's like if you rank AD carries from like a 1 to 10, it's like Doublelift's a 10. The next class is like a 7 compared to him, is kind of how it feels like. So if Johnson, it's crazy to talk about after 2 games, but a guy with that type of solo queue potential, would he ever consider like being an 8 or an 8.5 or something? Would be a top 3 for Dignitas. That's what it feels like.
He's good, and I'm excited to see him. People joke about NA's lack of talent, so it's good to see this kid come in. Here he is.
I know. I want to see it. FlyQuest 2.0, our trees. The tree thing popped off this week.
It popped off.
That is the best branding thing FlyQuest has ever done. I mean, making like C9 Junior, that was a pretty good branding decision because they mainly just had C9 fans back when they were like Balls and Lemonation and High. But second to that, maybe Tree Quest was pretty cool. Freak's Call, like 4 more trees after getting a kill. But again, would trees be as popular if they're 0-2? Because it's the fact that they're 2-0, surprisingly.
I think the 2-0 helps a lot. But as soon as I saw the tree thing, and I think based on Freak's Call, that was the moment I was like, wow, this is maybe the best brand decision we've seen from a team, like, period, since like the franchising era. It's one of the best. It's like right up there in terms of being able to generate. Like, one, it's good. Yeah. Like just a general, like, if we step aside on a moral level, it is a good thing. This is what they're doing is good. Mm-hmm. But also on just a branding level, you see a lot of posts coming up about, like, when you read the post game matches, they're like, oh, this is 260 trees. People are tracking how many tree. Like, people are starting to keep a tree count for the split, and I think that's a really cool thing. There's like a reason to watch these FlyQuest games, and I think they were lacking that branding before, and so it's cool that they were able to come in and do something that doesn't rely on like a single player carrying your brand. It doesn't rely on some like awful meme. This is like a good meme that carries your brand.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned that you've been on the PoE hype train for a while.
I love Power of Evil. I think it's one of those things where you catch a game. I can't even remember what specific game it was. I think it was one of those 60-minute Optic games, where they
one of many.
Yeah, they played a ton of them, and I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this guy is like so good. He hasn't died all game. He's probably on Syndra or something, and I think when you watch performances like that, it makes you evaluate a player maybe higher than they deserve. I'm not sure if that's true, but it's like this is true in professional sports too. Sometimes you have, like, let's say you end up going live to a baseball game, and you watch somebody pop off. You might think that guy's way better than he is for the rest of your time in baseball. And
he went 3 of 4, and he's a 240 hitter.
And it just creates a fond memory in your own biases, and I think I don't know if that's true for me with Power Evil. I think he's good regardless of my own biases, and I think it's kind of hard to disagree with that. Yeah. And so it was exciting to see him join FlyQuest, where last year I thought it was a team of, I thought they maybe underperformed a little bit. It was a team of 5 players who, I don't think they had a glaring weak spot on their roster, but there wasn't like a shining star in terms of like, hey, this guy can just put you on your back and carry you, and I think Power of Evil has that potential.
Yeah, and I think if the game is 37 minutes long on average, that's going to favor him really well.
Yes.
Because I think the weakness of Power of Evil is you don't often see him make huge early game plays, which is how a lot of the game was decided last year and how a lot of teams think the game will end up being decided here. But Prawley brought up the point, especially of coaching pro teams for 4 or 5 years, that week 1, he likes picking high skill floor champions and late game scaling, because he doesn't think anyone's going to be ready through travel, through practice, to actually pull off these high execution strats. So people might try to do the early game stuff. Late game stuff's going to win week 1.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart comment from Prawley. I think going forward, the one thing that gives me assurance about FlyQuest is I do think they can shore up their early game, and like we don't need Power of Evil to be the monster early game, because now he has Santorin, he has Ignar on his team, and I think those 2 guys will go make plays early. Yeah. And so I think that kind of fixes it. And I also think, when I think of Power of Evil, I also think back to 2017, specifically the series against SKT, when Ignar and Power of Evil were on the same team.
Yeah, true.
And in that series, Power of Evil made his bread and butter was actually moving around. He didn't solo kill Faker. He wasn't like sitting there smashing Faker in lane. His bread and butter was moving all around the map and kind of generating a lot of pressure that way. So I do think he has it in him. I think maybe CLG asked him to play a different style. Maybe Optic needed him to play a different, more controlled style where he felt like he was the sole carry on the team. And I feel like on this team, there are a lot more pieces around him that can enable him. And I think this is I called him a dark horse last week. Yeah. And after week 1, I don't think it was a particularly tough schedule in the first week. No. But I do think coming this week, they have TL and Dig. Yeah. We'll get a pretty good understanding of how strong they are. I think they're pretty strong. Like you say 4-0 Dig. If I had to make a crazy call, I say 4-0 FlyQuest. So one of us is wrong here.
Nice. I have them 0-2. But that's I'm so conflicted, because it's like they have to play TL right away, and I'll preview that a little bit more when we get to TL, because you're absolutely right. Like every year, we have these kind of under-ranked teams or lowly ranked teams pop off at the start of the split and then fall back down to earth later.
Yes.
But I'd be willing to hop on the FlyQuest, tree train if they end up 2-0.
Yeah, let's do the trees, man. That's like
yeah. Okay, that's cool. 2-0 from you, 0-2 from me. Next one you had here was 100 Thieves, that shaky win against Golden Guardians. And then the Monday night loss to EG that was kind of this pretty big deflating moment. Do you still want to see Papa Smithy recast the game?
That was happy birthday, Papa Smithy. I hope you had a nice weekend. I saw him briefly before matches started over the weekend. He was talking about how nervous he was, and I think he's mentioned this on air too. Like, I think he said something like, "I'm the closest person to the team without actually being able to affect the result." Like once the game starts, and that's true for all.
And he really didn't want to play Golden Guardians week 1.
Yeah,
because he was saying there's like a no-win situation here. Like either we beat them and people say, "Well, yeah, come on, you're going to beat Golden Guardians," or they lose to them and it's disaster. So I can imagine how much he was sweating as they saw Meteos get 4-buffed and lose the first Dragon Soul. But then, to their credit, kind of still win the game.
They still won the game. I think I mentioned, like at the end of the day, have you escaped this weekend where you played awfully with a 1-1 record? Kind of hard to be terribly upset about that.
Yeah, and you wrote, you don't think Ryoma's debut was poor by any stretch of the imagination, didn't wow you, and you could make the case that using an import slot should wow you. This is going to be, I think, one of the more interesting storylines because it's not like 100 Thieves came out of the gate and said, we got this guy because he's a superstar and he's going to smash. Mm-hmm. And originally, their messaging was going to be that they're going to play for the long term, and then they ended up getting like the Meteos and the Cody Sun, and people kind of think, hey, 100 Thieves can be good right now.
Yes.
Every team's always going to try to win as much as possible. But to me, like the week 1 of Ryoma makes me think he's clearly bottom half of NA mid laners, maybe even bottom 2, but that doesn't mean that they should bench him. Yeah. If that makes sense. That doesn't mean they should immediately find a new person. I think he will need some time to get comfortable in NA playing with players like Meteos and Someday. Yeah. What do you think about that one?
I agree with you completely. I think you have to commit to the project. I agree with you that he doesn't look good after week 1. I would go so far as to say he might not be top 10 NA, period, in mid. Like you might pick a few academy players even at the moment who are better than him.
Belter, Demonte.
Yes. But I do think you could say, well, the idea is we understand that, but we know this is where Pole Belter's ceiling is. We know where Demonte's ceiling is. We're not quite sure where Ryoma's ceiling is, and I think that's the investment they're making here.
Yeah.
And I respect that. But again, like I said, if you're going to import a player, in my opinion, when I say you could make the case, like I personally do make the case, is that if you're going to use an import slot, especially on a role like mid lane, that player should impress you. And I think we've seen other mid lane, like Power Reveal was very impressive. Fevabin in his first split was very impressive. Crown was generally impressive enough relative to this, and like Bjergsen immediately impressive, Jensen immediately impressive. We've seen a lot of mid laners come to NA who have made impacts, and Ryoma has a lot to live up to. And I think a lot of us were kind of tempering expectations before the split. 100 Thieves made it a point to do that as well, because I think they understand he's going to face a lot of pressure.
Yeah,
I'll be curious to see how he adjusts to. It was a rough week 1. I think he knows it. Sometimes it can just be nerves, but let's see what happens with him going forward. The one thing I would be worried about though is if let's say your goal is to win Worlds, and I imagine that's Papa Smithy's goal.
It's every team's stated goal.
Yeah, it's every team's stated goal. I just personally, when I think back in history, there aren't very many players who develop into world-class players who weren't like showing flashes of that from the get-go, and so that's the thing I would be nervous about.
Yeah.
And it's not like Ryoma is a completely unproven talent. Like I'm not going to say I watched much OPL, but he played a couple splits there. So he's not like a fresh kid out of solo queue like Johnson is. So I am a little worried in that sense. And it's not just players, but it's also teams. Like it's very rare to see a player or a team suddenly go from like just awful to, and maybe that's a harsh way of putting it, but like go from like the very bottom of the barrel to becoming a world-class player. And that's the thing that would make me nervous if I am a team that is trying to win Worlds. Yeah,
that's a good point. We'll have to keep tracking them. They play CLG and C9 coming up. So the C9 one, I definitely have them losing. And the game I have the absolute least confidence in predicting is 100 versus CLG.
I agree with that. I think whatever you put CLG's going to go out there and prove you wrong. Like, whatever. That's like the whole mission.
Here's my strategy then. I put 3 of my stock buys on CLG.
That is kind of surprising to me, actually.
So I will say 100 Thieves will beat them.
Gaming the system.
Yeah, gaming the counter logic voodoo. Evil Geniuses is 5th team you have on here. 1 and 5, Evil ? Geniuses. It's going to be a constant, like a little bit of a meme because they came out so strong with their evil branding. Jizuke's flamethrower was a great step in the evil direction because he's the guy who can do the evil laugh. Jizuke also had an incredibly impressive LeBlanc game.
It was really good.
And also something Azale brought up on the dive, Kumo had a 17.6% kill participation for the weekend, which is kind of another weird thing. He was very much just a weak side top laner while the rest of the team moved around. They play Golden Guardians and TSM this week. Kind of going through your thoughts here. What stood out to you?
17% number. I did not. That is one of those numbers you hear. It's like when you hear like what was the damage? Like 420 damage.
It was sub 10, but he got 2 kills on the final push of the second game.
That is rough. That's life of a top laner sometimes.
A little bit, yeah.
But that's interesting. I think that says a lot about where they were playing towards in week 1, which is kind of surprising because with Sven Skaren, I think he liked to play around Licorice quite a bit, and so it's interesting to see how they've flipped around and just kind of playing to their pieces.
Yeah.
With the flamethrower, I just want to mention real quick with Jizuke, when I'm talking about their evil thing, because I've talked to these guys a lot behind the scenes.
Okay.
And so it was hard for me to picture him being evil because during the asset day when we're taking photos, a lot of players, they'll bring in props and whatnot to get a funny photo in. Demonte used to bring in like clocks or watches or whatever.
Okay.
And Jizuke brought in like these bunny ears, which is like one of the official mascots for a K-pop band called Blackpink. And if you follow him on social media, he's pretty famously talked quite a bit about how much K-pop he follows and listens to. He was telling me about how he went to a concert, I think in Spain, where he paid tons of money for it, and it was like an intimate 50-person concert. He's like a huge,
big time K-pop fan,
Blackpink fan. Like especially Blackpink was the.
I want to look up Blackpink now.
Blackpink is like the biggest girl group in Korea. Like I don't think they're not as big as BTS, but they're huge.
Right.
I think their fans are called Blinkies. There's a whole ton. Maybe we don't talk too much about the more we talk about
that's
K-pop,
something for people that are interested that can go down the rabbit hole later.
Yeah, and we'll draw a lot of these stands. It'll be kind of weird, but it was just interesting just to see it's like this cute rabbit ears.
Yeah.
So just interesting to see him come in. He's a very fun personality, and I think a lot of people were talking about how EG has a lot of team chemistry as individual people, and so it's interesting to see how that manifests on stage. I was talking to their general manager, Greg.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how this is a team that has a very high ceiling, but sometimes maybe they're inconsistent. I think we can see that already.
Right.
They looked great in their win over 100.
Yeah.
And they looked awful otherwise, right? So
yeah, this team as a 1-on-1 team looked a lot like I thought they would. I think their biggest issue is going to be getting to 20 minutes with gold parity, because I don't think Bang or Kumo are going to be able to play that lane dominant, and unless Sven Skaren has a mega pop-off early game, that's not going to be there. Like Jizuke will split or be behind because he's more of a playmaker. So it's always that Sven Skaren with losing lanes. But 100 Thieves with Ryoma and the Cody stunt bot lane didn't have a dominant early game. And then you got to see them kind of claw back through just really good communication. Zeyzal and Sven Skaren, that's a world semifinalist, bot jungle or support jungle duo from 2 years ago. And I'm kind of going to push last year's C9 under the rug because it sounded like they kind of went boom during the boot camp, and that's why we ended up seeing Blabber for the 50-50.
Yes.
But that's kind of where I'm at with Evil Geniuses, where they are looking like that is what we expected. They play Golden Guardians and TSM. I think they'll beat Golden Guardians. And the TSM game is going to be really interesting.
It could go anywhere. I don't know.
Since TSM's mid-game macro seems so bad.
No, I agree with that for sure. I think I do want to just highlight, you mentioned briefly how he looked great on LeBlanc. I just wanted to reiterate that. He made several individual picks. Like there was one he got on Meteos going over a wall. There was another one where right by the Baron, he went in and just he popped Cody Sun immediately with some help from the back line. I thought that was just those were two plays that immediately stood out, and that's the kind of LeBlanc you want to see. When you compare it to, like, I think Bjergsen was trying to do that, but he wasn't able to execute. And so it's nice to see a mid laner play LeBlanc and be able to generate that kind of play.
Yeah, next up is Immortals, who are shockingly 1-1, actually, because I think after day one, many of us were saying they're the worst team in the league. But you're saying you're grateful they escaped week one with only a single loss. Yes. What stood out to you about Immortals?
Well, I know that the Soaz and Ica were dealing with visa issues. I don't know if that means that necessarily that they didn't even practice like over the off season. I don't quite know how much practice they had as a unit, but I do know that affects your team morale and synergy quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so, and you know, they might still be dealing with jet lag coming over here, because jet lag can take up to a week to deal with.
Yeah.
And so they were only flying in pretty recently.
It's technically roughly an hour per day, or sorry, a day per hour of time zone you switch is for your body to actually fully adjust.
Yeah, so they were dealing with a lot of different off-the-rift issues, and I think it's hard to judge teams. And I think this is always our issue with week one in any split. Is like, how much can you actually assess of a team on week one? Like, we're going to talk about Liquid right after this, and it's like same thing with them, right? Like, they don't have their starting jungler. Like, we're not going to sit here and be like, oh, you know, Liquid is good or they're bad, because it's not going to matter in 3 weeks when Broxah does come in or whenever he finally gets here. And with Immortals, I think similar type of issue after week one is, sure, they looked bad, but you also probably should expect them to look bad based on the circumstances around the team. So going forward, I think the question is, like, what do we watch for? People were making fun of Ica Zoe. Soaz, you know, there was a gif where they lost like a team fight because he went to go get mid-prio, and then you can see Soaz do like a classic.
Yeah, Soaz reaction cam.
Soaz reaction cam, where it's just like, you know, but that's just how Soaz is. Like, I wouldn't read too much into it. Like, oh, it's not like he hates his team or anything. It's just like he's always been like that, even when their team has been dominant. And so I'm just excited to see. It was fun to see him get like it was kind of a backdoor at the end to get their sole victory. I'm kind of excited to see how Soaz adapts to NA. He kind of had a quiet year last year, but I thought, like, I've always thought Soaz was one of the top players. When push comes to shove, and you need a guy on your team. Let's say it's 45 minutes. And let's say we're starting the game starts at 45 minutes, and you have to draft players. So it has to be like one of my top picks in terms of like picking top
what
players.
happens after that point?
Once
the game loses all structure.
Well, yeah, he's so good in situations with no structure, and NA is a league, and NA as a region is very good at creating no structure games, right? Yeah. We love all these ARAMs. Soaz is gonna, I think, throw a wrench into some of these ARAM groupings.
He's not doing it.
Yeah, he's not gonna do that. He's gonna move around and do something else, and NA teams might not be able to adapt very well to that.
It was true in week one. That's how they got their first win. Team Liquid 1-1. The important part of the week, you say, was their new mascot, Blue. I think a lot of people missed the cold open to the show where their mascot unveiled their banner on stage. Talk to me about Blue.
I mean, what's there to say? He's round, he's cute. You know,
is he edgy or is he cute?
I think it's mostly.
I think he's cute.
It's like cute. Maybe tries like it's like when a cute thing tries to like be like, if you look like that, you can't be edgy. You can try to be edgy, and it just comes off as cute.
Do you have any more backstory on this thing? Is it going to be the mascot? Is it going to be at every week? Is it going to be at like summer finals? Like, what's going on?
So I heard that it's going to be here. They're going to try and bring it in every week. I don't quite know. Like, I imagine they're going to use it for their other teams. Let's say like international or like a CSGO event happens to be going on. Maybe they'll fly it out for that instead.
Yeah.
But I would imagine for big beats especially, they'll come here. Like, assuming TL makes finals, which is a fairly good assumption, I would expect to see it there as well. You know, hard to say. There isn't much else for me to talk about with Team Liquid. Like they don't have Broxah. Sternfire has only been practicing with them for 4 days. What's their like? I think they're gonna be good.
I'm gonna continue to track Doublelift to see if he can perform at a high level, because I thought even though he had 34.1% of the team's CS share between 15 and 30 minutes. That's a stat that is hard to find usually, but is really important into like, how does Uzi get so much CS? It's like, after a certain percentage, it's because your teammates let you. And that's what Doublelift did. He fell behind in lane to Kabe by getting ganked by Dardoch twice with a wraparound gank. Late flash on the first Leona Q. It was tight, but like a peak form Doublelift wouldn't have died there, I feel like. Yeah. And then beyond that, the second death was pretty bad. But they still are just so good as a team, the fact that they can just grind out a win against TSM like that after having a bad early game, like other teams can't do that.
Yeah, I mean,
and they don't even have their jungler yet.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see what they do. I also think the one thing that's cool, talking about Double Lift being so much better than every other AD carry, is the two most OP picks potentially in the meta right now are Senna and Aphelios.
Aphelios, yeah.
Or at least they're two of the most contested picks. And so it's interesting to see, hey, we just introduced these two insanely strong champions. How's Double Lift going to handle this? And I think when you give the best players the best tools, they're going to shine, and I think he'll continue to shine so long as those champions stay relevant.
Yep. They play Dig and Fly. Since I said Dig will go 2-0, that would mean a 1-1 for TL.
Yeah.
Since you said Fly will 2-0, that would also mean a 1-1 for TL. But yeah,
not a bad. So they could get the 6th seed.
Those are two interesting TL games.
Yeah, they could lose both games, honestly, and I'm still putting them, like, they're still my favorite to win the whole thing.
Yeah.
As long as Broxa comes over, I don't expect there to be many issues for Broxa fitting into the team. And so this is one of those things where, hey, just tank the early. It's like a lot of NBA teams will do this. You don't worry. You don't, like LeBron famously on the Heat and the Cavs.
Yeah.
They were never good regular season teams, but you never picked them.
It
never
happens,
picked against them otherwise.
It happens even more on teams with sustained success.
Yes.
Like the getting up and energized and focused for regular season games is just harder every single time you win.
Yep.
So this team could be 1-3 and 1-5, and maybe I'd start to think something was wrong, but like it has to go that far.
Yeah, 1-5 would be an alarm. But
yeah, if they lose 4 games in a row, then it'd be like, okay, maybe something's wrong. But even then, I'd still be like, they'll probably be in finals.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still gonna pick. Like, they would actually have to miss playoffs for me to not pick against them at this point. They could they could probably start 1-7, and I would still be like,
as long as they make it. As
long as they make playoffs as the 6th seed, and it also kind of just depends on, like, if Broxa comes back and they lose the first 4 games, I think we start hitting the panic button. But if Broxa ends up missing week 3, week 4, and they keep losing, I'm not that worried.
Cool. Counter Logic Gaming. Speaking of being worried, it's doom and gloom for a lot of CLG stuff.
It's been doom and, like, it was wild because they had a good summer, and you're sitting there as a CLG fan, and you're like, thank God, finally, we beat TSM. Things are like, who cares what happens the rest of this year? We got the win over TSM. Things are looking up. Off-season hits, they lose Power of Evil, but then they're bringing Crown. I think I saw a lot of people call that an upgrade or a side grade. And again, as somebody who's been on the Power of Evil train,
you're like, hey, wait a minute, maybe not.
I was like, I don't agree with that. And so I was pretty low, personally, on CLG coming into the split. Crown didn't really impress me much last year. I don't think he was necessarily awful, and he had a few games where he looked great. But I don't think he was consistently what you would want from somebody of... Like, I think when you think Crown, you think former world champion, you think super... And I don't think he quite lives up to that, and that's maybe not fair. I
thought last year, Spring Split was particularly strong, but then kind of throughout the rest of the year, you were wondering where his footing was.
Just kind of fizzled a little bit, and... So with CLG, he was another player that struggled a bit with visa issues. So I do want to say, like, I think there's going to be some adaptation and some time required to that. But with the other thing I mentioned is last year Wiggly was somebody who was a really surprising bright spot for the team. And he looked not very good in week 1. And I don't know how much that is attributed to having the dynamic of the mid-jungle kind of shift. But it's not just mid-jungle. His support has changed as well now.
You want to hear my CLG apologist theory for what happened week 1?
I would love to hear it.
Okay, so... Yes, they did boot camp in Korea, but if they had that desync time with Crown and he actually didn't get in until 3 days before, that means they were practicing a bunch with a different mid laner, working around that, and then have to context switch back right before the end of the week. In terms of the way they want to play, I think they've been preaching all offseason this, like, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That's how COG is going to be strong. Smoothie talking so much is going to help us with our communication, and I think it's very much one of those teams that is saying, follow the call, if that makes sense. Like, just go. They're not good at that yet, but they're trying. So they had very few kills, but if you think back to their first game against Dignitas, they consistently went for it. Like, they were going all in on these fights, and they were misexecuting, right? Because it felt a little bit like someone was doing their own thing, then they'd hear the call, they'd drop what they were doing, and then they'd go, rather than kind of knowing what the call was going to be 6 seconds beforehand and then going so everyone could think. But the willingness to go is actually a good sign, because I think a lot of teams have a really hard time getting that willingness. That's the apologist part when I say that's good. And the Wiggly play, where he flash EQ'd into 2 people and died instantly. Yep. If you look at the mini-map, Ruin and Smoothie were both coming from both rivers. So that was definitely a miscommunication. It's definitely something that has to be improved. But that is one where it's like 80% on Wiggly, and I'm putting at least 20% on the other 2 for saying go, go, go.
Yeah.
Because they 100%, I'm sure that was a hectic calm to say we can turn this, we're going to have 3 people there. The timing was off. The execution was awful. That's why everything is doom and gloom. But getting that mental tick to just go, they already have that. They're just not using it right, if that makes sense.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I agree with you. I think that's a good sign, and we've talked a long time about NA teams in particular, especially on the world stage, how they don't pull the trigger, and so you want a team that gets good at pulling the trigger. And we've seen this. This has been the most successful strategy on the international stage for the last 2 years now, is teams that just go, right? And we don't really have a good team in NA who
just goes.
Who just goes. I think the closest was Cloud9 last year, but even they weren't quite to the same caliber as these other EU teams, these other Chinese teams in particular. And I agree. I think it's good that they're trying it. I'm kind of curious if they keep trying it and it keeps biting them, though. Eventually, you stop touching the stove, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm going to abstain from predicting their 100 Thieves game.
I think that's fair. My prediction is there will be no winners.
I hope not. There was only one game where there were no winners last week. That was TSM Immortals. Golden Guardians, GGGGGG. Did I talk to you about I think it's like Golden Glue is actually Septagy, like he has 7 Gs.
Yes, I don't know if you talked to me personally, but this is something I've also told you.
Because it's Golden Glue on Golden Guardians, and his name is Grayson Gilmer, and his middle name is Gregory.
Yes.
It's unbelievable number of Gs.
I don't know how this happened. Like part of me sitting there, like that had to be part of the pitch when like he's talking to them. Like that had to have come up at some point. It was like, there's a lot of Gs here. It's like a match made in heaven, right?
Yeah. And they went 0-2, unfortunately.
They went 0-2.
They were so close to winning their first game.
I thought they should have won the first game. I would go that far. They should have beaten with a start like that. If you're telling me your jungler gets 4 buffed to start the game, and against this guy who, like, I think Closer looked great in that.
He was one of the best looking junglers of week 1.
Yes, and so I'm sitting here, I was like, man, if you get that kind of, like, the negative, pessimistic look at this is, if you get that kind of start and you still lose the game, how does that spell the rest of your split out, right? Because a lot of times these kind of lower tier teams, and I think almost everybody had Golden Guardians bottom.
They were
bottom 2,
when I did the preseason power rankings, they were 10th with like the people I surveyed around the office.
Yeah, I mean that was where I would have had them as well. And so I'm sitting here, it's like if you can't win with that kind of start, like usually that's how teams that are worse win games, is they can cheese the early game and they can build advantages like that. Because the longer the game goes, the worse it gets for a team who's not good on like a macro level.
Yeah,
I would be extremely worried if I am Golden Guardians, and it wasn't like they lost a long game. Like it's not like TL beat them when they had to start like that. They lost to 100 Thieves, who also did not look good. So it's a rough place to be in for a team like that.
Yep, they got EG and Immortals coming up. So the EG one, I'll say it's unlikely, just because I still think this Fenskar and Zazel like shot calling macro show is going to be in full effect. The Immortals one, that'll be that tester.
That'll be it.
Yeah, that's the one where I think when I was looking at the schedules before the season, I'm thinking, oh man, one of these two is going to get their first win. Yes. That was the way I was thinking. Immortals already has it.
Yes.
So Immortals could come out of this looking real good, but Golden Guardians, they need that one.
Yeah, I think Immortals is going to be one of those teams that you're going to say this kind of thing. Like it'll be 8 weeks, like we'll be 6 weeks in, you'll be like, Immortals is like kind of in the playoff picture.
Are they going to be I felt like this way about Clutch in 2018 spring.
Yeah.
Where almost every time I'd say, I just don't feel like they should be winning.
Yes.
And then they made 4th. Like they just climbed.
I think that you might see something like that out of Immortals. I don't know if they'll hit 4th, but I do think this is a team that's going to kind of hang around the playoff picture the entire split. And it's going to be one of those teams you look at and you're like, by eye test, they look awful. But then you look at their standing and it's like, oh, they're still winning though.
Yeah, I mean, if that is the case, it's like the X-Smithy Soaz effect.
Yeah, they know how to win.
They know how to win. They've won so many times in the past, and then they can kind of just guide the rest of the team. And I heard a stat about Altec, actually. In splits where he's played the whole split, he's always made playoffs.
So
the JJ Redick of the LCS.
That makes sense. Like I think I've always thought Altec is like a solid
just
player.
like a solid,
yeah, he's solid,
above average player.
Yeah, he's not going to be the MVP. He's not going to hard carry you the first pro or whatever. But he's not going to like be the one that completely ints either. So I think it's fine to have him.
While we're talking about Golden Guardians, we just compliment Immortals. That was sweet.
That was, I mean, it's
that's
rough.
just what happens because Golden Guardians. Keith is the one where needs to look a little smoother. The Tom Kench deaths that he had against Cloud9, I don't actually blame Keith for that. I blame the team for that because that was a situation where Golden Guardians really wanted to do 1-3-1. They had the Diana. I don't remember exactly what Hanser was on, but it was another like kind of divey champion. So they needed to do the 1-3-1 spread, wait for the mid lane to push, and then collapse in. But they were always the ones getting collapsed on. They never matched it properly. And it kind of just showed that they didn't know how to play 1-3-1 macro. Like, obviously they're against Cloud9, so that's what we think is the best team in the league.
Yes.
Can still improve. Rough. And last but definitely not least in terms of discussion point, is it the same old TSM? TSM has only ever 0-2'd week 1 once before.
I did not know that either.
It was 2018 spring.
Not a good omen. It's been a rough couple years for TSM. So the big thing, and I'm actually really curious about your take on this because a lot of this has been the thing about TSM, even when they were good, was TSM just rolls over and dies. They don't know how to be proactive, you know. And to me, that's always sounded like pretty kind of lazy analysis. And I've cracked that joke here or there too when talking to people. But for me, when I'm looking at this, it's like, is that really what's happening? Are they just mis-executing what they're trying to do? Like, what is the difference? I'm just kind of curious to you.
Yeah.
Like, this is the big critique when you go in Reddit threads, you go on Twitter, is people joke about, TSM is like just refuses to do anything. They're just happy to sit there and die. Like, how do you take that?
So I'm going to jump off one of the things you wrote. You said the long-running criticism is that they don't do anything. It's not like the team with this much experience is sitting there and saying, I don't know what to do. I think a more accurate way of putting it is they are failing to execute on what they see as their win conditions. I actually think it's a mix of both. I do think there is a level of I don't know what to do. Because if we evaluate their TL game from a microscope, they didn't know what to do in the first 10 minutes. Dardoch played great. Shut down Doublelift in a sense, stopped him from starting off. They had the GP make it to like his ultimate timings. But then what they actually need to do there is they need to crash bot. As soon as they have GP ultimate up, they need to set that play up and they need to crash bot to kill Doublelift. They failed to execute that because they took the safer play in stacking Drakes. So then they say, okay, let's get Dragon Soul. But in trying to get Dragon Soul, they stopped doing the other stuff. They let mid-wave get pushed in. They let Doublelift get his farm back. They lost wave control because they were so hyper-focused on getting this Drake. And then Bjergsen gets bursted from 60% health on Zillion, doesn't get his ult off, they don't get Dragon Soul, and they slowly lose from there. Because they had sacrificed so much of their early advantage for this one narrow thing. So I think it's almost like they kind of know what to do, but they forget to do the other things in the process of doing that thing, which makes them lose.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So you mentioned with Doublelift getting the CS back, a lot of the Kabe was also getting a lot of criticism because Doublelift died twice, and then Kabe was still down 20 CS by like 10 minutes. By 15 minutes, it was like even. Yeah. It's like he was getting crushed in CS. I'm kind of curious. Do you think that was like, is that an issue with Kabe or was that an issue with team?
I got to check Purview on that because that would be like a. I feel like the only way that you get your lane frozen on that, and then they're Leona MF, right? So they're actually highly vulnerable to engage from Zyra Khan. So if they don't have scouting on Schernfire and they don't have Dardoch or Bjergsen there to help crash and reset the wave, they're just going to get frozen. So that's another type of like, there is a level of hyper safety on TSM. There was a moment I was watching the game and you could actually find this if you go back. It was, I think, around 10 minutes, and Broken Blade was like 10 yards behind his top turret when Schernfire was bot lane. Now, Broken Blade didn't know where he was, right? Either the guess was wrong or the intel was wrong, but a lot of top laners are like at least a full health GP at like level 10. Unless it's obvious that the jungler's there, they're going to greed.
Yeah.
Like, you always have to have a certain level of greed to stay competitive in League, and the LPL showed this more than anyone.
Yes.
TSM has, like, no greed.
Mm-hmm.
And that means when they make a good play, that just, like, makes up for their lack of greed, and the game's still equal.
That's really interesting. I've never heard a team say like they don't have enough greed. I think that's a really good way of putting it. I think that makes a lot of sense for them. It's just an interesting team to kind of monitor. Because I think you and I, being longtime people in the scene, when I think TSM, it's still hard for me to separate them from being like the 6-time champion, from being this like 10 finals in a row. Like, we think of TSM as being a premier team, but the truth is, on results at least, that hasn't been the case for a while now, and especially with an 0-2 week. I don't know if it's surprising. Like, even looking at the roster on paper, it wasn't a roster that like wowed anybody. Like, people were, I think, excited maybe for the potential of Dardoch. I think people were excited to see Kabe come in, but for me, Kabe was always like about a side grade from Sven. He had a great split in EU. I think he's a great player, but like, he's been around. It's not like it's a new kid that came out of nowhere. It's like you know about how good he is, and it's a very solid AD carry. So I'm just TSM. I don't know if you should hit the panic button just yet, especially with Bjergsen saying he was sick. Yeah. And I think that affects you quite a bit.
And this would be another like TSM apologist excuse or something, but they have been having issues. Their training facility's not ready yet. Their practice hasn't necessarily been great. They're in like an office space where they're able to practice right now. And those excuses don't get brought up because that doesn't excuse the loss to Immortals.
Of course.
Right? Immortals had issues. They were worse.
Yes.
But it's not as clear-cut as it actually seemed to me initially, where it's like, this team preseason boot camped in China and then Korea.
Yeah.
Like, they should be in midseason form, and they lost to this.
Yeah.
But their current practice situation is like substantially less than ideal. So that's another one where you can try and put a little bit of hope. And then the second bit of hope is they had the best goal difference at 15 of all teams in the LCS.
No, that's really good, actually.
So, like, there's still some bones to work with. And I think, if anything, I don't think anyone should have the hot take of, like, oh, they're in danger of missing playoffs, even though we'd say that a lot about almost any other O2 team who lost to Immortals week 1.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I'm not as worried about them as I am the other O2 teams.
Yeah.
I'm even some of the 1-1 teams. Like, I'm still more worried about Immortals than I am TSM at the moment.
Yeah.
So give it a few.
EGCOG. If they're 0-4, that's the panic button.
If they're 0-4, that's definitely the panic button. I mean, TSM, surely, if they've only been 0-2 once, and surely they've never been 0-4, right?
Surely not.
Surely not.
If they've only been 0-2 once, then all we have to do is check week 2 of spring 2018. But, so you gave 10 thoughts. You gave many thoughts to me. Do you have any final thoughts before we go into week 2?
No final thoughts. I have 10 thoughts every week. It's been very consistent.
That's it.
My brain stops when I hit 10.
It can't get to 11.
We shut down.
We can't expand. Just your article series would have to end.
Yeah, that's it. 11 thoughts is a different person. 10 thoughts, that's Kien Lam right there.
All right. Yeah, that was Kien Lam. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff.